Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, April 16th, day 558 of the war. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our U.S. Bureau Chief, Jacob Magid. Hi, Jacob. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda. Good to be with you again.
Always a pleasure. And we're going to get caught up on what is happening in all sorts of talks. First of all, the Iran nuclear talks, and then we're going to talk about the hostage release negotiations. We'll also hear about the Palestinian Authority's pledge that it has stopped the controversial pay to slay program and what they are promising in order to have it checked. All this and more when we're back.
I like what I do as a Jew, and I find it interesting and meaningful, but I want to learn about what's out there and how do the rest of our people connect.
You come in knowing some things, but nobody here knows everything, because everyone has had like puzzle pieces, and together we kind of make up this whole larger puzzle.
I think the Hartman Fellowship has impacted me as a Jewish leader more than any other Jewish program that I've done, because it's sort of broadened my horizon on what exactly it means to be a Jewish teen and what sort of Jewish teen learning looks like.
Jacob, let's take a couple steps back and discuss the first round of direct nuclear talks that happened between the U.S. and Iran on April 12th, Saturday in Oman. So on Saturday, U.S. Mideast envoy Steve Witkoff met with the Iranian foreign minister face to face for a brief conversation, about 45 minutes, what I understand, in what marks the first time since the Obama administration that the two sides met together directly. So what were the initial reactions from this conversation?
I think the Trump administration, actually both sides, have really tried to spin this as a positive discussions. It was interesting, though, that the Iranian foreign minister said that this direct meeting took place only for several minutes, and it was just a happenstance. Oh, hello, good to see you. Whereas Steve Witkoff's side said, no, this is 45 minutes of real substantive discussions. I guess this was the way to kind of meet in the middle, because the Iran had been saying that this is going to be indirect talks. They don't want to be legitimizing too much Trump administration, given that how Trump had treated Iran last time. If you remember the Soleimani assassination and all the sorts of sanctions that the U.S. had put on Iran during Trump's first term. So Iran is in a very difficult state, and as a result, willing to hold these talks, but trying to save face by saying they're indirect, whereas Trump, that administration has been adamant about holding direct talks with all of the people that it's trying to work with, i.e. Hamas as well, as we saw earlier on. And this was their way to spin this as a win by saying, even though Iran had talked about indirect, we were able to have this one-on-one, or at least there was a meeting with the Omani foreign minister standing by the side, after you had this separate round of negotiations where the Omani foreign minister was running between the rooms to pass along messages regarding I think this more initial, there weren't too much substance in these talks for what I understand, but that's why there's a second round right now that's going to be planned for Saturday. It's a little unclear where that's going to be yet, but we can talk a little bit more.
Right. And initially we heard from Witkoff, of course, that our red line will be that there can't be a weaponization of your nuclear capability. And then yesterday, it seems as though there was a bit of a reversal in that. And we're hearing a very different tune in terms of what the US's red line actually is. So what is it at this point?
It depends on when you're asking them and who's speaking. Witkoff, as you mentioned, gave this statement to the Wall Street Journal last week, where he said that the starting point is going to be dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. However, the red line is going to be weaponization. And from that, I guess you could say that it's basically leaving open the possibility that, yes, we'd like dismantlement, but we're willing to accept something in between. We just want to make sure that Iran doesn't weaponize. And how he expands on that in an interview that he gives on Monday on Fox News, where he talks about the U.S. cannot accept Iran enriching beyond 3.67% of its uranium. And this is an interesting specific percentage because it's the exact same benchmark that was used in the JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear agreement that the U.S. under President Obama negotiated with Iran. And that was an agreement that Trump pulled out of 3 years later and has been incredibly critical of and saying it was a horrible deal. So the fact that Witkoff is then using this key aspect of the deal as a frame of reference is quite interesting, and it set off a lot of alarm bells amongst hawkish Iran hawks in Washington, and even pro-Israel groups as well, who were concerned that this was now going to be the position that we weren't talking about the full dismantlement of the Iran nuclear program, just making sure that it can't be enriched to a certain level, because currently it's much of Iran's uranium is being enriched to 60%, which is enough to get to weaponization of a nuclear bomb. So now I think that because of this freak out, we saw Witkoff then issue a tweet, which I guess is oftentimes the Trump administration's clarifying policy, where he's saying, actually, no, the red line is going to be, we just don't want to have any sort of enrichment program whatsoever. So that's now the new red line. It's hard to know, did he walk this back because of pressure from the hawkish Republicans, or did he simply misspeak, as it seems to have happened several times with Witkoff and other Trump officials. Adam Boehler also had a couple rough interviews, if you recall, as well. And it seems like the fact that these are not long-held diplomats with lots of decades of experience, these mistakes might be more likely as they're trying to learn as they go, and that could be another explanation for this walkback. But basically now, to answer your question, right now the red line seems to be you can't have any enrichment program whatsoever. But given that they've hinted otherwise in other conversations, you would have to wonder whether behind the scenes, actually, the red line is not so red.
Right, because obviously the flagship of the Trump administration is making deals. And when you're making a deal, you push the envelope as far as possible and then potentially walk it back. But obviously, Israel is not happy with any of this going on. And our Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, proposed a different proposal, which was basically a Libya-like compromise, something like that. So what would that compromise be?
Yeah, that's the red line that Witkoff is now speaking about, which is the full dismantlement. I mean, in Libya's case, it was going in and exploding the nuclear facilities. I think is seen by Iran to be as something that's not just going to happen. I think they're willing to negotiate based off of what Witkoff is talking about, at least initially. And I think that's probably what he heard when he was in Oman over the weekend. But I think Israel is at a very different position, and I think is definitely concerned about these talks. But it's interesting that Netanyahu has been briefing reporters over the past few days, talking about how he doesn't doesn't believe that these talks are really going to go anywhere, and that once they do fail, then we can look at a military option in a matter of weeks, if not in a matter of months, if not weeks.
And in fact, Trump hinted to that in a statement that he made, which was basically, I'll give it, 2 months or so, and then whatever, all hell will break loose, or whatever kind of statement was made. So clarify that a little bit for our listeners.
Right. Trump is often, I think he's used the phrase hell to pay, not just in the Gaza case, but in the Iran case as well. And he's saying that he doesn't want to be tapped around. That's a phrase he's used in the past regarding Iran. And he recognizes that could be a strategy of the Iranian regime right now. Iran, for its part, is saying it also doesn't want to hold talks for talk's sake. But it is noteworthy, I think, when I was in Abu Dhabi for this conference last week of various officials, current and past officials from in the region and also in the U.S., there were several Biden administration officials who were almost giddy, it felt, about what they feel was this very likely scenario where Trump is going to sign on to a deal that is going to be very similar to the JCPOA that was signed onto in 2015. And they point to his real reticence and uninterest in having wars, and therefore believe that he's more willing to accept a deal that maybe Israel is not so comfortable with because because he doesn't want to drag the region into a war. And I think that's the way they take it. Trump, I think, is just so unpredictable; it's hard to really know. But it was interesting to hear that's what they think, how they see these talks heading.
And there are two other players in the mix, which we haven't discussed yet, and that's Russia and China. And what we're hearing is that potentially Russia would be storing the enriched uranium. Give me a little clarity here too, Jacob.
You got it pretty right. I think that the Trump administration is in a much better relationship with Vladimir Putin and the Russian regime than the Biden administration was, and as a result, they're willing to use Russia as a partner in this process. And the idea would be to have either A, Russia play part in the inspections, or B, actually transfer some of the nuclear material to Russia for it to be stored there. But obviously, given what we've seen Russia do in Ukraine, it's not exactly a totally reliable actor, according to a lot of others, especially given the fact that you have European countries who are also part of this agreement and whose snapback sanctions could come back into place later this year. If you need their cooperation, I doubt they're going to be okay with having Russia play a central role in this process. But given that they are part of this broader agreement, maybe they won't have a choice.
And we just need to be clear here that Israel does face an existential threat from Iran, which repeatedly vows to destroy the Jewish state. So this is not a hypothetical conversation for Israel at all. And you have to wonder which side of Trump is going to win out here. Is it the no wars? Is it the protect the Jewish state? Obviously, we have no idea. And are you hearing any kind of buzz about this situation in Washington, Jacob?
I think there's some apprehension from pro-Israel Republicans about whether Trump is some discomfort with some of these comments about Iran. Definitely, I think they weren't happy with how the meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu went last week, but also I don't think they're willing to say it publicly at this stage. They don't want to be coming out against the president or doubting his commitment to Israel. And he hasn't actually done specifically anything yet to require that doubt on the issue of Iran. There might be talks, but it's not like they've led to an actual deal that Israel is not okay with. Obviously, like it was with the Obama administration, though, is that if you wait until after the deal is over, then you're stuck with something that you're not really happy with, and that's what happened. So, again, there's just so much unpredictability; it's hard to know. But for now, I don't think any criticism of Trump is coming to the fore. I think they're focusing it on the envoys themselves, and that's where there's been this interesting dynamic where when Steve Witkoff has come under fire, you've had Republicans or even President Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., issue tweets in support of Witkoff and others as well, and other Republican lawmakers who have done so to try to give them the support they need to continue in their roles. But obviously, you've seen in the case of Adam Boehler where there's been more willingness to turn on him over the comments he's made regarding Hamas, and I think the talks he held directly with them that was not something that the Israeli government liked. So I think it depends on how close the person is to Trump in terms of their ability to continue in their role. Not that Adam Boehler's been totally removed, but he has been sidelined, it seems like, from the Israel issue.
And just finally, the unpredictability continues in that, as you mentioned, we don't exactly know as of recording time, my very early morning, your late night, where the next round of talks are going to be. We heard reports of Rome, and then we heard reports of, again, Oman. So we just don't know at this point. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not just reports. These are the Italian foreign minister is coming out and saying that Rome is going to be hosting these talks, and then Iran's state media, which is basically just the Iranian government, coming out and saying actually it's going to be in Oman. I guess the location isn't too critical at this stage. Obviously, there are certain indicators that having it at a certain country versus another one, I guess, does give. But at the end of the day, it's about the content, not the location.
Correct. We're going to go to a short break and then discuss the hostage release negotiations.
I and my wife, we were mourning with the people. But because of the way that things have changed, let's say in the last 5 to 7 years, there was a feeling that, and this is the substance of an exchange I had in dissent with another member of the magazine's editorial board, the kind of progressive movement, I think a lot of people in the progressive movement felt, well, if we make a big deal out of Jewish pain and suffering in the wake of October 7th, it'll be instrumentalized and used to justify the war. That's like a generous interpretation. And my argument was actually not mourning legitimates the war. And this is because people don't understand also how like Israelis feel themselves to be in the world. That if you were able to mourn, then you also might be able to say to people, look, like this, what happened is heinous and horrible. And there is another way other than living by the sword forever. But when the world's response to this is you got what you deserved and this is even a good thing, well, you only confirm the sentence that the whole world is against us.
And we're back. We heard last night that Hamas has turned down an Israeli offer for a 6-week ceasefire in Gaza, which demanded the group to disarm. That's according to the BBC, citing a senior Palestinian official. But really, it appears to me, at least, Jacob, that the negotiations are at a standstill and pretty much have been, despite reports out of Egypt with some optimism yesterday morning. It just appears that nothing is moving at all. What are you hearing, Jacob?
I think that's a good read. I think there's been a lot of reporting about incremental progress or various new details about this offer or that offer. But at the end of the day, we're still looking at something where Hamas wants to have guarantees that there will be negotiations and then an actual permanent ceasefire, whereas Israel's not willing to give those guarantees and is trying to get as many hostages out while still maintaining the ability to resume the war afterwards, because they want to be able to dismantle Hamas, or at least their governing and their military capabilities. So as a result of that, one Arab mediator put it to me like this, that it's hard. You can't negotiate with a party by saying that the end goal is to annihilate you, but then making demands of what you need from them before you do that annihilation. I guess it was a defense of the Hamas position by this Arab mediator. But I think that does kind of encapsulate where we are right now.
That's so interesting, Jacob, because I would read it as an Israeli. You can't annihilate a people, meaning Israel, which obviously Hamas has vowed to do repeatedly and still vows to do, to annihilate Israel, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely Hamas's part of raison d'etre.
Right. And so obviously we have two sides that are vowing to annihilate each other, though I would say that Israel is specifically targeting Hamas, not the Gazan people, whereas Hamas is obviously targeting the Israeli people in general. And Hamas still has hostages in its clutches, including Idan Alexander, the final living American Israeli citizen. And recently we heard statements from Idan's father, Adi. What did he say?
So he gave an interview to News Nation, and he was asked whether he has a certain message to the American and Israeli leadership. And his his comments regarding the U.S. President Trump was to say that he wonders whether he's going to start losing patience with the current situation, that you have this war dragging on and no hostages coming home, given that he had campaigned on this war ending. So that's this open-ended question for Trump. And then for Netanyahu, he asks, how do you plan on getting the final hostage out of Gaza without a commitment to end the war and start the second phase of the deal? Because the second phase is about a permanent end to the war and a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, which is not something that Netanyahu has said he's willing to do before Hamas has been dismantled.
Okay, let's turn to another thorny issue, which is that the Palestinian Authority has formally invited the Trump administration to certify that Ramallah's reform of its controversial welfare system, viewed as incentivizing terror, is being implemented. So we're talking about the controversial pay to slay program, which has basically paid families of would-be bombers and bombers or any kind of terrorist who has attempted to kill Israelis. So obviously that's controversial in general. And this program has gone on for decades until now? Is that right, Jacob?
It was codified about 15 years ago, but it's the concept of these payments to prisoners, given that there's been always a need in Palestinian society to support because there's so many of these prisoners. That concept has existed for a long time.
But not just the prisoners, if I'm not mistaken. It's also the families of suicide bombers have received these payments, meaning it not only incentivizes terror, it pays generations of the same family for this terror. So let's move on and talk about what is being done to at least reportedly stop this program.
Right. So if you remember in February, President Abbas signed a decree that canceled legislation, which conditioned these payments that we're talking about on the length of the person's prison sentence. So now the idea is that these payments, welfare payments, as they're supposed to be, will be based off of income and based off of someone's economic status. And what you've had over the past couple months is you've had this application process of families who are now who have to, in order to receive welfare payments, reapply, and then have those applications adjudicated by officials in this new body that's basically the welfare ministry, that will see whether you qualify for this kind of this payment. They look at whether you have things like a washing machine in your home, very specific technical, I guess, criteria to determine whether or not you apply, and that's process takes some time, is what the explanation of why this announcement was made in February. But the system is not yet in place yet. The payments have not been restructured. But what now they're saying is they're basically putting their money where their mouth is, at least that's what they're trying to do, by saying to the Trump administration, come starting June 1st, that is when this program will be fully up and running. And you can start certifying whether or not we're abiding by this new policy. Because the Palestinian official I spoke with said basically we wouldn't be doing this if we weren't confident, because it would be a massive embarrassment if the Trump administration officials come to Ramallah and see that actually we're just playing them and that the system is not in place. Obviously, there's another reason behind this. The reason why they want this certified is that there's legislation at hand that they're trying to reverse, which is called the Taylor Force Act.
So before you get into what this is, the Taylor Force Act in 2018 makes provisions for 4 particular conditions. And so far, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, is basically not meeting any of them. Though in February, with this announcement, they're trying to meet the first one. Is that essentially what's going on here?
I would say that they have met the first with, for sure met the first with this decree, because that all the legislation, this condition requires is for them to initiate this decree. So now that's one thing. The second condition is about actually following through with the decree and making sure that these payments are no longer in place and that there's nobody getting any money, but even if it's for welfare or anything else, but based off of whether or not they've killed or their family member is killed or participated in a terror attack. So that's the second condition that will now be adjudicated by the Trump administration. Then you have another thing that I think U.S. officials I spoke with say that the Palestinian Authority is doing, which is maintaining security cooperation with Israel and combating terror in the West Bank. It might not be doing it to the extent that Israel would like, but they do believe, officials I spoke with, that this is something that the PA is fulfilling. And then the fourth condition is the concept of condemning terror. And this, I think, is going to be up to the Trump administration to really decide whether this is happening. What you have seen is the PA come out with several statements in recent weeks really condemning Hamas and saying that they're dragging out negotiations. They're risking lives of Palestinians with the way that they're handling the war. And I spoke with a Palestinian official who said that these are specifically geared to trying to fall into compliance with this condition of the Taylor Force Act in order to, because what I didn't mention before is that Taylor Force, it bars the U.S. from giving assistance that directly benefits the Palestinian Authority. And that's something that the Palestinian Authority really wants, even if it's not literal aid that goes straight to the PA's coffers. There are lots of projects that the PA directly benefits from that would be allowed if the PA is found to be in compliance with Taylor Force and if the U.S. gives this certification. So They haven't been, there's been some lower level officials who've condemned October 7th, but Mahmoud Abbas, for example, publicly has not done so. So I wonder if that's going to be something that the U.S. is going to ask for in order to certify Taylor Force. But there's clearly, it's going to be interesting to see what they do. There's good, the certification process is an opportunity to present a win, and the Trump administration did that initially when the decree was signed in February. They said this is a big win for the Trump administration. So I think they would like to frame it as something that Biden was never able to do and that we're able to get done. On the other hand, they are facing probably lots of pressure from more hawkish Republicans who say we can't trust the PA, and we don't want to give them any sort of legitimacy. So we'll see what happens when Trump officials get on the ground starting June 1st and start just having to decide whether or not to certify the PA.
Yes, and in fact, if they actually become compliant to the Taylor Force Act, it is a big win for the PA as well and increases their international diplomatic standing. And alongside these condemnations of Hamas, perhaps maybe puts them in a situation in which they could be considered as playing a part in the day after of the war in Gaza, which may come soon. So, Jacob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.